Live it is. All right.
Oh,
3 minutes behind. That's not bad. I think we did pretty good, right?
hey man, people of color time. It's not bad.
So what is up, guys? Thank you for tuning into the Modern Macho. This is your host Juan Carlos, and I'm here with my boy Santi.
What's up, everyone?
We are two gentlemen documenting our journey. We are embracing the dudes that we are in order to become better men for ourselves and our village. We're tired of fitting the mold. We're tired of the dick measuring contest, and we're tired of pretending to be somebody that we're not. After each episode, we hope that we're able to plant a seed, get you to start a conversation with your circle, challenge your thinking, motivate you to focus on growth, and hopefully bring awareness to the twisted programming that we've been brought up with believing. Today, we have a very special guest. I want to check in with you real quick, my guy. We're going to have a therapist join us. I'm excited to get him in here, to get to know a little bit about him, his journey, and then his professional journey as well. So, but first, how are you doing, bro? What's going on?
Doing good. Excited to have our first guest for this new season. I guess this new revamp, and
Sure.
if I'm not mistaken, I think it's our first male therapist that we invite to the space.
It
Is that
is.
correct?
Hell yeah. Yes, sir.
So I mean, it's great to finally get like a true professional who's been trained, certified, licensed to actually dive into these emotions and yeah, man, I'm excited to see what comes out from our conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. So, gentleman's Cesar Rodriguez. He's a therapist from Southern California. He has his own private practice. He is trained in EMDR and is currently getting his training in psychedelic assisted therapy. He shared with us his philosophy, which he believes that going to therapy is essential. That it's just like getting an oil change, and if it doesn't get done when it's needed, then it presents issues later. And that right there is facts. So, without further ado, my guy Caesar, welcome, welcome,
Hello.
welcome.
That introduction, you guys made me feel so welcome. I feel all chingon. I usually I don't have an introduction like that, so I feel very privileged that you guys bring me on with such praise.
No,
Of
man, like
course.
I told you, man, I appreciate you taking the time to join us. Just to have the conversation. I think one of the missions, one of the goals here, really is yeah, you're a therapist, bro, but like you're a dude, just like us at the end of the day, right? And so we want. I want to start there. Like, who is Caesar? How did we get to where we're at, man?
Geez, that's such a big question, and there's so many ways I can like go towards it. Just the name Caesar brings up so much trauma.
Mm,
Just the name. So a little bit about me. I grew up in California in Orange County in a predominantly Caucasian neighborhood. And part of my cultural identity, I grew up, my name was CESAR, but growing up in the neighborhood I grew up in, there was a lot of gringos. They would butcher my name, and man, they really struggled to say my name, Cesar. So I would be like, oh my gosh, just say Caesar, please, because anything other than hearing Caesar was just uh, like nails on a chalkboard. I couldn't
yeah.
deal with it. So I quickly learned that I needed to assimilate to the dominant culture and kind of just blend in so no one could see me. I didn't want to be the typical ethnic representation for a whole population of in my elementary school. So I often try to hide frijoles and beans and rice and all this yummy food that my mom would give me, and I would be embarrassed because all these other people had sandwiches
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
traditional foods. So yeah.
Damn. No, I appreciate sharing that. I definitely. It's heavy. It's heavy. So you said you were born and raised in Orange County, correct?
Yeah, so born and raised in Orange County. I grew up here my whole life,
Yeah.
and I'm half Mexican and half Salvadorian. My dad's side is the Mexican side, and then my mom's side is El Salvador. So I have an interesting dynamic for sure. I'm sure you guys know, like, there's a lot of clashing between
Yeah.
these two
Yeah.
different cultures.
Yeah.
Right.
I,
And do you
and
actually know where that comes from?
Yeah, so I spoke to my mom about it a while back ago. I'm like, what do you make about all this Salvi Mexican beef? It's like, it's crazy because we're both Latinos, and
Right.
why is there so much beef between these two cultures. And from what my mom said, and obviously she's biased because she's Salvadorian, but her response was like, we're the little people from Central America don't get a lot of respect, or we're often talked down to from the bigger Latin communities such as Mexico. And it's interesting saying that, because during the World Cup when it was going on, Mexico felt the same way, that how they represented with Argentina, and how they view other Latinos. So it's like there's like levels to,
Sure,
like,
sure,
on the
yeah,
hierarchy. Like if you are this European, like, because Argentina has a little bit of flavor of Italy, and so they're kind of like looked at as like the more better.
it has like a more of an extravagant look,
Like
right?
European.
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's
Close
interesting.
to
I
that.
actually, my son's mom is Salvadorian, and it's funny because I never knew why, but we would always joke about it because I was like, you and I are not supposed to get along. I'm pretty sure this is like a thing. Like we're not supposed to. Um, do you
Yeah,
do you
it's bigger
have
than the
siblings?
Bloods and Crips.
Yeah. do you do you have siblings?
Yeah, I have a younger sister.
Okay.
She's a few years younger than me. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So it was just two of us growing up, and my parents divorced when I was really young,
Mm,
and it's kind of how I got into therapy. I went to therapy as a little chamaco, like, and I was like, man, this therapy stuff is really stupid. I hated it, to be honest. I was
oh
like,
wow.
yeah, I'm like 5 years old, and my mom's like telling me, "Go talk about your feelings, mijo. Like, express yourself." I'm like, "Mom, do you realize like we're not allowed to do that? Like, you're teaching me to do something that's triggering me. Like in our culture, my dad told me like, no, tienes que ser hombre, tienes que ser fuerte. All this
Mm,
macho, toxic traits of like having to man up. So I didn't like going to therapy. I actually, like, me now, like if I would have talked to like little CESAR or little Caesar back in the day, he would be like shocked that I'm a therapist. He wouldn't
damn,
understand.
dude, total 180, huh?
Yeah.
Do you feel like throughout you growing up and your adolescence, did you ever reflect back to maybe those therapy sessions and tools and whatnot that I guess you may learn or you went through? I mean, because you're a child, I imagine maybe something stuck, maybe some things didn't. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Santi. Yeah, even though it was at the time, it was a horrible experience, because I'm leaving these therapy sessions and I'm crying, and like I feel tired from all these tears coming out. And looking back at it, like I learned so many tools and kind of seeing things differently, and I was able to like not take things so personally.
Mm.
Wow. Speaking of the
Yeah, I know. I
devil.
was just about to say, speaking of, dude, so we have a book club actually,
Yeah.
and shout out to the guys of the book club, and that's one of the that we're actually reading that agreement right now, and we've been doing a chapter a week, and we decided that we were going to extend this chapter for an extra week because there was so
Mhm.
much juice that we were bringing to the table about taking
Yeah.
things personally.
I love that book. Shout out to Don Miguel
Yeah,
Ruiz.
shout out
Like,
to Miguel Ruiz, man. If he's listening, we're gonna get everybody listening to and reading that book for sure. Um, so there was obviously a shift there now into what therapy was for you growing up into now seeing it as a very important tool. So when did that kind of like start happening for you when you started looking at it with a different lens?
yeah. So I started looking at it differently. Once I was in college, I started like applying like some of the things of like, man, why did this happen? Why did my father, you know, move back to Mexico? And it was really confusing, because as a kid, I was just thinking like, man, I can't believe he just dipped out. Like, did he forget? Like I had a birthday, a graduation. He just like totally dipped out, and it was really confusing. So during my adolescence years, I was in a really dark place, like just trying to understand why me, why me, why me. And I often thought like something was wrong with me. And then I was going to therapy as a kid because I was forced to go, and I made a decision as an adult when I was in the beginning years of college years. Like, no, maybe I should actually go to therapy and let's try this out. I'm like, you know what? It's not as bad. So little by little, I'm like, man, it's even though a lot of strong things are coming up and it feels uncomfortable, especially as a guy, to go into this space that's vulnerable and you're like doing the exact opposite of what society teaches you as a man and what other men tell you or what other females have told me in the past. Like it felt like a 1 hour session of just like, yeah, saca todo eso. Like all those things that I'm going through, I can just have a safe space to let it out. And I just found really beauty and just kind of having someone to talk about it, not feeling judged.
Mm, I love that. One thing you brought up that I think is key there too is you weren't necessarily trying to solve anything. It was just the hour of being able to release whatever it is you had going on.
Uh,
You know, and I think that sometimes that I've struggled with that of like trying to solve the problem. You know, Sant and I have talked about this of like, okay, I want to go to therapy or I want to just talk about my feelings so I can solve them or I can figure out where they come from to make them go away. And it's like, el hecho de nomás decirlo, just to say it is like, oh shit, this actually feels kind of nice.
Yeah, as a therapist, one of the things that I've learned is that my clients that I work with, they don't really necessarily want me to like solve their problems. Like I think they think that coming into therapy, like, man, I'm gonna find this therapist, they're gonna tell me what to do, and we're gonna fix everything. And I've even thought that too before I became a therapist. But then I realized like most of the relationships I have, whether they're professionally or personally, they just want a space to kind of talk about what they need. They don't need to be fixed, they just need to be, the key word is validated. Um,
Mm.
and that's not something as men are taught. And I want, if you guys don't mind me kind of giving you guys flowers for a moment, your guys' podcast and your guys' Instagram page is amazing. You guys really speak to a community that it's not safe to talk about these things, and you guys are normalizing these conversations. And if I was a kid back in the 80s, like seeing something like this would have brought me so much hope that it's okay to be in these safe spaces. So, like, I really appreciate what you guys are doing.
Thanks, man. Thank you. That means a lot. It means a lot.
Yeah, definitely. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm kind of curious to. I mean, so one of the things I want to talk about are is coping mechanisms, and I know Carlos brought it up earlier. Um, and I mean, and I'm curious to pick your brain both as a says out of the human being and the therapist and what you see, because I feel like you talk about what's normal for us, and I feel like for men there's certain coping mechanisms that are okay and certain ones that are not. Typically the ones that are okay tend to be really toxic, and like the one thing that I think is like drinking, for example, right? I feel like that's kind of one of those things, or being getting angry about shit, you know what I mean, just kind of like letting things blow our fuse and then venting out in a manner that we're showing our aggression and we're displaying dominance in the situation and whatnot. And so, I mean, I'm curious, like from your point of view, like, once again, like what. I mean, it's kind of a big question in terms of like what are things that you've seen, and also like what are some maybe like tips and things that have worked maybe in other people and yourself to kind of create healthy habits, because I think that's the hardest thing is trying something new and sticking to it, right? I'm thinking things like journaling, things like reading in our and right reading good things
Mhm.
that bring out like positive things. I can only imagine, it's probably difficult for folks to just log on, right? Because I mean sometimes that's difficult. Or even when we have our circles, our community, like we used to have like men's circles where we would just talk and whatnot. And I'll tell you, bro, every time it was so difficult for me just to get in there, even though I knew it was good for me, right? But
Isn't that
anyways,
interesting, Santi?
yeah.
That you knew logically that it was so good for you, but there was a part of you that says, "Don't do it." What do you make of that, Santi?
I don't know, man. I think like and first thing I think is like it's my fucked up brain. Like you know what I mean? I just and that's what I think, right? But I think more than anything, obviously, there's that socialization piece that I'm personally I'm not used to talking to other men about my emotions. I feel like a lot of my emotional nurturing was that weight was put on the women in my life, right?
Mhm.
And so now I'm socialized to think, well, women are the ones who are responsible for my emotional well-being, which is not true, right? That's totally not.
Cancel.
Yeah, I'm canceled now. Shit.
Well, you bring up a good point, and I wanted to say something about that topic, Santi, before I answer that question. You brought up a really good point that being around other men is considered like expressing emotions, being vulnerable is very taboo. Ay, guácatelas. Oh, we can't do this. We have to not show any weaknesses, showing any uh, vulnerability or showing any feminine traits is considered less than a man. And when you notice that you're in these spaces where you don't feel comfortable, that's actually your trauma, the gender trauma of what you experience. So I want to completely normalize what you're going through is a response towards past experiences that's telling you this is not safe. And to kind of put a little bit of science into this conversation, is that there's this theory called polyvagal theory, and it's based on our nervous system. So whenever we see something and it makes us uncomfortable, polyvagal theory basically believes that there's a sympathetic nervous system that's attached to us, and it's a two-part system. The sympathetic is the fight, flight, and freeze system, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the calming system. So whenever our body is noticing that we don't feel comfortable and it doesn't feel safe, it gets activated, and you'll notice like a shift in what you think about yourself. You'll notice a body sensation, um, like an emotion that might come up, and that's your body telling you like this isn't safe, I don't feel comfortable. So you feeling that way, Santi, is just a complete normal response towards like trauma of like I don't feel safe around men. And one of the questions you had about like a coping skill is finding something to regulate that nervous system, because that nervous system is being activated in that moment. And it's important to turn on the parasympathetic nervous system, which allows the calming state of mind. So sometimes, like what I like to teach men is using progressive muscle relaxation. Have you guys heard of that technique before?
Nope.
Okay.
Never.
If you guys are open to doing it with me right now, would that
Yeah,
be
let's
cool?
do
I'm
it. Man,
down, dude. I feel like
man.
I'm in class.
Okay.
Hell
Man.
yeah.
All right. So basically, progressive muscle relaxation looks like you tighten certain parts of your body and then you release it. And I'm going to ask you guys to do it for about a minute or so. And what you guys are going to do is you're going to tighten certain parts, and any parts that are kind of you hold too much pain there, and it's like maybe it's a limb or something and it's like kind of sore, you can just skip that affected area. And what I really like about progressive muscle relaxation is that it regulates your nervous system. So
Mm.
there's this thing that many therapists say is that trauma is stored in our body, or stress is stored in our body. So whenever we're in a space that we don't feel comfortable, our nervous system is telling us something. So the way it works is that I'm going to facilitate this for the next few seconds. So
If you're
what I like to,
listening, I mean, can listeners, well, can they follow along?
yeah,
Like,
totally.
I mean, even
Absolutely.
Great point.
asynchronously.
Great point.
Oh yeah. Okay, sick.
Yeah.
All
All
right.
right. So what I'd like you to do, if you both feel comfortable, close your eyes for a moment. And I want you to take a deep breath through your nose and hold it for a few seconds. And then open your mouth and slowly release. Let's do that two more times. Take a deep breath, inhale through your nose, hold it, and open your mouth and release. One more time. Take a deep breath in through your nose and open your mouth and release. So, what I'd like you both to do as you guys keep your eyes closed is I want you to focus on my voice, and I want you to pay attention to your feet. And what I'd like you to do is I want you to acknowledge your feet right now in this moment, nothing else. And if your mind gets distracted, that's completely fine too. But just take a moment to focus on your feet. And what I'd like you both to do is curl your toes and arch your foot for a few seconds. Hold that tension a little bit longer and release. Continue to take some deep breaths. And what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to put your legs as close as together as possible. and hold tension and squeeze your thighs and squeeze your legs together as hard as you can for a few seconds. And slowly release. And remember to continue to take some deep breaths and inhale. And exhale. Next, I want you to focus on your glutes and your abs. I want you to hold some tension and make it as tight as possible. And release. And allow your body to feel that feeling of relaxation. Next, I want you to squeeze your fist and hold it as tight as possible. And hold it for a few seconds. And feel those nails inside your palms and just squeeze as hard as you can. And notice that tension. And slowly release. And allow your body to go limp and at ease. Next, tense your entire face by distorting the muscles in your face. And release. Lastly, you're going to tense your entire body, your feet, your toes, your legs, your glutes, your abs. I want you to put your shoulders behind you this time. And I want you to make a fist and hold that tension for a few seconds. And slowly release. And just notice that feeling of relaxation. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Take a deep breath and inhale. And when you're ready, open your eyes and release. All right. So, Santi and Carlos, what was that like doing that?
I just saw you do this on. Did your eyes get watery too, or was it just me? 'Cause
No,
my eyes got
no.
watery, but I actually I didn't realize how tense I already was. And I think right now, just kind of put the mic up. I think just like focusing on those parts. I think over exaggerating how tense all those parts were. I feel so much more like relaxed and in tune.
Yeah.
And it's a weird feeling because I actually realize I don't feel this often.
So that tells you that uh, you're not aware of like the body sensations. So often what happens, and I notice it within our community, that we're very anxious. Like we always think about what's going to happen. And I notice that in my profession that it comes from like generational trauma because like, sometimes I've told my mom and my dad something and you're going to, ¿vas a chillar, César? ¿Para qué? Oh
Mm,
my gosh. Let me tell you what happened in El Salvador during the war, during the guerra. I'll tell you what really happened. Or my father would tell me I had to work at second grade just to like, take care of the family. So like they would often minimize. So I would
that's
often
heavy.
be anxious that I had to like take care of everything or had to be
Mm,
perfect because anytime I shared something, I often felt invalidated or they didn't understand me and they would minimize me. Especially my father would tell me like you're not being a man. So my body would respond and just be tense and I would often feel anxious. So like I often teach our community like take a moment to be present with your body and what you said, Carlos, like you just were aware how your body was so calm. It really tells you like you're so sometimes people can be so in their head that they don't even realize that they
Mm.
need to slow it down just to kind of regulate their nervous system and calm our bodies down.
Yeah, yeah, that's such a good point. Because that was another thing that I actually noticed too was as I was trying to do that, like I was really in my head. Like I was
yeah,
really,
I felt like I was overthinking a lot too. I
yeah.
felt like I was very like, am I doing this right? Wait,
Uh,
Yeah,
like so and I think because of that, I don't think I think for a moment I felt really present and I felt very like, whoa, like this, and then I started thinking again. And so I think it was for me it was really hard to shut off my brain and just
yeah,
go with it, you know. Uh
yeah.
But and I think once again, because I was like, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? That was really what I
Mm.
was thinking.
Yeah. And there's no right or wrong way of doing these things. And I
Mm,
appreciate you,
love
Santi, saying that,
that.
because sometimes we get in our heads, like if we're doing this good enough. And I know I'll kind of be vulnerable for this moment of like, I often get those thoughts too. And like, even me as a therapist, am I being a good enough therapist? I get often stuck in my head.
Mm,
And as you guys are continuing reading the Four Agreements, like those things of like questioning ourselves, of like if we're not good enough, it's kind of like we have to do something to get external validation from other people. But in reality, we don't need to get validation from nobody,
mm-mm.
because that's poisonous. When we put our power into what we believe in ourselves, you're good. We are all good just the way who we are as people. But yeah, that comes up for
Yeah.
me often when I'm like, as a beginner, I had this imposter syndrome. Why is someone going to want to work with me as a therapist? I'm Chicano, like the Salvadorian. No one's going to want to work with me. Like, no, especially working with Caucasians. I'm like, how am I going to help them with
Mm,
problems? Like,
yeah,
that,
yeah,
that
that's a good
sounds kind
point.
of weird.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, it says that imposter syndrome for listeners. I mean, I know for me that was a very like what the heck does that mean? Could you share a little bit about what that actually means, or how that has been very much present in, I think, in a lot of our lives?
Yeah. So imposter syndrome basically means is like we feel like we're a phony, that we don't belong in these spaces. And I know for me, imposter syndrome started at a young age of needing to assimilate just so I felt like I belonged in this community,
Mm,
uh, because I didn't feel like I was good enough. And that theme often presented itself throughout many years of school. Even in grad school, I was like the only Latino in our program, and it was like a program of 80 people in our master's program, and I'm the only Latino guy there. I was like, man, am I the token person? Like, did they just need to say that they needed someone? So I often felt like an imposter here with all these people. Like I didn't feel like I was like I belonged in this space.
oh wow.
But after reading the Four Agreements and after doing my own therapy, it was actually the other way around, is that these spaces haven't evolved to have representation of diversity, of BIPOC, and it says more about them than it does about me. Actually, I belong here. It's just that they don't know how to have representation. So it says more about society and how structural racism and all this discrimination happen in these big organizations. It has nothing to do with me. It's more about them.
Yeah, I love that. I loved how you were able to kind of shift the mindset on that.
Yeah.
Um, you talked about acceptance, and I wanted to, if I may, I wanted to ask you a little bit about like where were those spaces where you felt accepted and loved? And I asked that because I can't help but think of myself. I can't help but think of even like, Son and I have had these conversations. I think about brothers who are like, for me, it was with the drugs, right? And with the alcohol. Like that was the place. It wasn't the alcohol that was making me feel loved and accepted, but it was the people that I was hanging out with that were doing that that made me feel good and right. And it to me, it didn't fucking matter whether it aligned with my values or not. It just I finally found a place where I was accepted. So going through what you went through, like where were those spaces for you where you were feeling where you started to notice that you felt accepted?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. So most spaces it didn't feel safe at
Mm,
all. I'll start off with that.
mm.
I remember I was dating this one girl back in the day. I won't say her name. I don't know if she'll watch this podcast. uh, we'll call her Maria.
I
So
like
oh shoot, no, I dated a girl named Maria too.
Not the real Maria. This is the fake Maria,
Yeah,
the different one.
yeah. We'll call her Stacy, just some random name that.
There we go. There we go.
Uh, so Stacy, uh, I was in a space like this where I'm a bunch of other guys and we're talking about our feelings and what we're going through. And Stacy was like, "Man, so you guys get together as guys and you talk about your feelings?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's what we do." And she's like, "You know what? To be honest with you, I don't feel this relationship. Like,
Ooh.
there's something kind of iffy about you, and I think it's kind of suspect. Like that you get together with a whole bunch of guys and you share your feelings, and I hate to say this, but I don't think of you as a man. I think of you less than." And that was a rude awakening. I was like, oh shoot, she doesn't think of me as a man because I'm being vulnerable. And in that moment, I was like, man, the old me would have been like, yeah, man, fuck this person. Like, this is triggering me. Because all my other experiences growing up as a kid, it wasn't safe to talk about your feelings. But the only space that I did have that felt safe was my mom. She was really pushing me to going into therapy and really like listening to me without judgment or just like being understanding. And it was really nice having that growing up because I know not most people have that space to kind of talk about these things. So yeah, I used to drink often in the past just to kind of numb, similar to you, Carlos, of like I just don't want to feel like this breakup. Oh gosh, it was so much to deal with, and I'm like, I'm just gonna drink or fuck my problems away, and I didn't want to deal with it. I
Damn.
just wanted like this one night of enjoyment, and the next day, it just the cycle continues again. And so yeah, it was hard finding spaces like that.
And I mean, I would imagine like I don't know. You mentioned like the parasympathetic nervous system and whatnot. I mean, I would imagine like alcohol just probably shuts all that off, like on a very biological level. Because I feel like that's exactly how I feel when I'm
Yeah,
like battling not wanting to drink. It has nothing to do with the drink. It has everything to do with me just being numbed out
Mm.
from all like whatever bullshit is. I mean, and some of it, yeah, it numbs me from the things that are fucking with my head, but it's also numbing me from everything else that I could like authentic happiness as well, right?
yeah, you bring up a good point, Santi, because on one hand, it kind of like numbs you, and it also allows you to get a break from all that tension and all that stress. But on the other hand, you're also saying too that it takes away from enjoying the rest of like what's going on in your life because you're numbing yourself, right?
Yeah, wild.
Shit is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
It is.
But what drinking does is it's interesting because when people drink, have you guys ever heard of don't drake and drive?
No, no.
You know, Drake, he often gets
Yeah.
into his feelings, right? And you don't want to be driving. So it's like drinking and driving, Drake or driving. So don't Drake and drive, or in our culture, like don't who's that guy that passed away recently?
Vicente
Uh,
Fernandez?
Vicente Fernandez,
Oh,
you
that's another
know,
one.
because those feelings just come out of nowhere, right? And
And I
it's
think
these
sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, no, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just gonna say like you brought up the whole like strength, right? And then we're talking about the drinking, and I think that part of what has kind of fucked this up for us is the drinking has been looked at as the strength, right? Like what we're talking about it now is the drinking is what's making us numb. But for the longest time, I know for me growing up, especially with the men I was surrounding myself with, it was like, this is strength though. Like strength is like CESAR can pound. Like that motherfucker can throw down and he can kill a whole bottle by himself. And like we can still make stuff happen. Like that was what strength meant to us.
Yeah. Yeah, like totally whipping out our dicks and seeing who has the biggest one or who can drink
Yeah.
the most. Like all this toxic stuff of like, wanting to do more just to prove that we're like man enough.
Right, right. And I appreciate you bringing up, thank you for being vulnerable with us for a second because I appreciate you bringing up the story about Stacy. And something that I think is also important is that like we've all fallen victims to the patriarchy, right? Like just like as men, we've done a part in that. And you know what? I'm not shitting on anyone, but I'm just saying like that we can all enable this, right? And that was a perfect example for you where you would have taken that very personally. I know I have. I've know that
Yeah.
I've dated women, dude, where because they said I wasn't man enough, I was like, fuck, you're right. Like I should not do this with the guys. I mean, Sant and I have talked about this. That's why I pushed away from the Bible stuff, like from the Bible camps, like any type of leadership stuff that I was doing that I enjoyed doing. I love being involved with the community, but I almost felt like it was like, dude, but that's not manly, bro. Like you need to fight. You need to do like manly shit if you really want to find yourself a woman, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's these things that we're often taught from generations to generations, that unfortunately, like, kind of like the four agreements they often talk about, is that our parents didn't have these tools, or our peers don't have these tools. So there were perpetuating these things that they were taught. So when I it's interesting, Stacy, a week later I had ran into her, and she came up to me and she was like, "Man, I fucked up big time.
Oh,
I didn't realize that I was kind of like I grew up this way." And she was Filipino, um, and she's like, "Man, I this is part of being Filipino. It's like I believe the Spaniards, right? The Spaniards
mhm.
conquered them, and they taught them a lot of their values and traditions. And she was kind of taught similar to like our community, like it's not man enough to do these things, and it's actually taboo. So she was kind of just able to kind of share what she went through, and old me would have been like, nah, fuck this person. Like, but then as I realized, like, my biggest uh, asset to becoming a therapist or in my personal life is just remaining curious. Whenever someone accuses me, the thing I always say, and I heard Will Smith say this once, and I've always loved it. Uh, when you listen to someone, you want to use this method called love. And instead of love being spelled Love, it's spelled Luv. You listen, you understand, and you validate that person. So
Oh.
whether I agree with her or not, I listen to her, I understand her, and I validate. So I'm just kind of being curious, like, where'd you learn this stuff, Stacy? Because what ends up happening, it shifts from like me not being a man enough to like her expressing herself and her telling me her childhood history of what she went through. And then we're having a different dialogue of like, oh man, I get your trauma, it makes a lot of sense. But if I keep it to like, oh, it's all about me and I'm not man enough, it's so easy to fall into that, because I've done it so many times where I was just like, toma, like, no, fuck this, like, I'm not dealing with that.
For sure, for
Like,
Sometimes it happens to me where the other part of me comes up. I'm like, I have to like, no, no, no. I have to remain curious.
for those of you that are going to be listening to this and not seeing it, I'm appreciating the hand gesture with the toma,
Yeah.
because yeah, I know
Huevos,
exactly
toma.
what you're talking about, bro.
Yeah.
And I wanted to give a second to Sant, dude. We kind of talked. You mentioned kind of tying all this in about the listening. You said something the other day about about being understood and being right.
oh yeah, I was thinking
Like,
about that
this is
right now
the perfect
too.
time to, yeah. If you could bring that up, dude.
Yeah, I mean, I was sharing in the book club the other day, and I think I shared it in the last podcast at the very end. Didn't go into it, but and I think it's really stemming from. So just to give you a little bit of background, Cesar, like going into this whole podcast thing, I was really hesitant. I was so hesitant, and a big part of it is because I work in education, and I'm nervous. I was nervous about going into talking about mental health, stigmas within, in circles of men, and then potentially, I mean, that can dive into politics even, right? And I really wanted to stay away from it, and I just felt some sort of way. I didn't want to be wrong. I didn't want to be canceled. You know what I mean? Not that I hold any like crazy ideals, but point being, that I think in a lot of our spaces that this platform has pulled me into has led me to talk with people I don't fucking agree with, and I think so there were times that I was kind of hard nosed, stubborn, like, nah, man, nah, like, and in my mind I was right. I was right. I was right. And I felt like it never got me anywhere. And so, I mean, just this past November, we went to Arizona, kicked it with some homies,
Mm.
and like I remember literally thanking some of the guys who I was around, because I was like, bro, like I feel like that I've now that I've allowed myself to open up, and not like fucking sell out on my values, but listen, just fucking listen to other people with other ideas. I've grown a whole new appreciation for those around me. Point being that I think now in reading this book, thinking about all those experiences, one of the realizations that I'm starting that I kind of stumbled upon that is that I feel that it's better to be understood than it is to be right. Because when you're right, like, I mean, yeah, you could be right about anything, but what's the point if you're not being understood in that situation? You're not able
Yeah.
to
Yep.
share knowledge with community, and you're not able to kind of utilize that thought to, you know, like be in conversation with other people, you know?
Something I hope my wife doesn't watch this podcast because she's going to be like expecting me to understand her, and you're putting the standard so high. I'm like, oh
No, no,
shoot, I
no, trust
gotta.
me. I haven't shared this one with my wife, so you're no,
We
I'm
might
just
have to
kidding.
delay this episode for like 6 months, just so everyone knows.
Yeah. No, but you bring up a really good point. It's so important that we're being understood, and especially with the climate of politics, man, there's such huge division. And do I agree with the other party? Hell no.
Hmm.
But I will say this: by me taking a stance of saying you're wrong and I'm right, doesn't really get me anywhere. But if I can just take a moment just to understand their point of view, you start hearing themes that are actually similar more to my themes of like what I went through,
Yeah,
and not feeling represented, feeling like a minority, and they feel like they're kind of being judged, kind of similar to what I've gone through. And then as soon as there's this similarity, there's this understanding, everything shifts. There's this conversation that's fluid. People are more open to expressing themselves because there's a space where, like, oh, you're not going to judge me. We can just talk about these things. But until the relationship is not established, people are kind of defensive. They just want to prove that they're right.
yeah. You bring out you, dude. I appreciate you sharing this. There's so many gems in that. You said right there, which was defensive, and I think as especially as men, I think a lot of times when we go into conversations, we're defensive. And I'll speak for myself. I won't generalize, but I'll speak for myself. And one thing that I shared when we were having this conversation was that I've also been in spaces with men that have been a lot more emotionally intelligent than me, where I was not knowing, right? Like I'm processing it now, like looking back, but it's like in that time, CESAR, I'm like, oh, I got to be right against CESAR. And then you being emotionally intelligent, right? You're just like, oh, I understand. Like, yeah, you're right. And then in my head, I'm like, wait, this motherfucker just said I was right, even though I know that technically I'm not right, but he don't care. And then that defensive attitude kind of like it gets questioned because now I'm like, okay, I basically got what I wanted, but why the fuck do I feel so confused?
Yeah. Kind of like what we were saying earlier, right? The imposter syndrome. Like, am I not being good enough? I'm not being man enough in front of all these men, right? And that
Right.
stuff often comes up for us too. And with my suegro, like, um, it can be difficult. Like, I'm trying to like get close to him, give him a hug, but now he's like, no, 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 arm's length, distance. This is my bubble, and I probably trigger him, pobrecito, like, because I'm trying to like break this generational trauma of what touch looks like for men on men. But like little by little, I kind of soften them up where he feels comfortable to like embracing me with a hug. But yeah, this it's also often this thing with us men where we're around each other where we just want to be like accepted, and we want to show that we belong in these spaces. And yeah, it makes it really hard because there's so many spaces where we're often questioning, like, do I belong here? Am I smart enough? And yeah, in the reality, like, we do belong in these spaces, and these organizations that are systemically racist where they don't have representation. It really reinforces, like, we don't belong here. Like, you see some of these schools, they have a lot of Caucasian names and they don't have representation. How is a student going to feel comfortable who's BIPOC and like, oh yeah, Williams is the last name? How come we don't have a Gonzalez or somebody that has representation there, so we can feel a space free in these spaces and not feel like we're an outsider? So like, it's like these little nuances, like, where people put things in spaces where we feel judged. And racism looks so different now compared to like what it was like before. I mean, the old school racism, like, they would just kind of like overtly say how they feel, but now there's like low key racism where people have these ways of thinking and they do it systemically where they kind of allow to help certain people but not help other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And kind of tying into like that post that I did about George Lopez, it's like when people have money and success, they assimilate and they forget about these traditional values, and they go back to like what they went through in their own childhood. I don't know George personally, but I can imagine like he grew up in this generation where you just had to figure it out, forget everybody else,
Right.
right? and
And
he's
yeah,
yeah, it's sad.
it brings up such a yeah. There was something that before we get into that, like something that popped up for me real quick was just like even how important it is for me as a father, like with in an environment right where racism is so present, and I can't help but also think like as you just mentioned like a child, right, like going to a predominantly white school, right, and then feeling out of place as it is, right. Something that as you said you experienced, I know that I did. I spent a year in Utah myself, and I felt out of place, right,
Oh
and,
yeah,
and I
Utah.
yeah dude, and I can't help but think of also just how important it also is, like as parents, to be able to provide sometimes that safety for our children, right? Like on the things that we can control, where it's like you brought up, I don't know, was this something that you brought up to your home, like feeling out of place, feeling, is that something you felt safe enough to do?
Yeah, I often, I was very vulnerable, like expressing to my mom,
Mhm.
like, my first example was like telling my dad, like, "Oh, I don't think he loves me. He doesn't want to spend time with me." And then eventually he moved. So I often felt like I wasn't good enough, and it comes from
Awesome.
like thinking that my father didn't love me, but in reality, like, it had nothing to do with me. But I
Yeah,
often thought, like, no, it was me. Like, I caused the divorce.
correct, correct. I want to talk now. You mentioned the George Lopez thing. And for those that don't know, there was basically a video where I think it's his podcast, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's his
Yeah,
podcast.
so
I think it's
it's
called
his
Ha
podcast.
Ha something.
It's his podcast, and basically they're talking about an up and coming comedian. And he basically, George is just like, who the fuck is this? Long story short, he's like, who the fuck is this kid? I don't fucking know him. I don't know his name. Like, I had to do this myself. Why should I be helping other people? And the reason why I want to bring it up is because you made a post about this and really how George Lopez is projecting from this. And now the reason why I want to talk about it though is because I know that there was a lot of shame and a lot of like cancel culture towards like, oh, George Lopez is, and see, like, I don't see that because, like you said, to me, it's like, damn, my guy is hurt. And unfortunately, him not having the space to really give himself the love that he needs, he kind of wants other people to suffer just like him. Right.
Yeah,
And I think beyond George Lopez, I think that's something that is kind of a generation thing, right? This gap
mhm.
of like my generation, we're weak. Santi and I, the fact that we do this makes us bitches because this isn't what real men are doing anymore. Um, so I kind of just wanted to, I guess, just open the floor to more conversation on that, dude. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, how can we help the older generation to understand? Like, you're actually misunderstood. We get you. We want to help you so that you don't have to project this and hurt the new generation, that because we need them and they bring so much value. Like I think of like being hardworking, right? Like there's all this like we wake up early stuff. And sometimes I'm like, Santi's even said it like about his own pops that I'm like, dude, there's some shit that I'm like, those are good qualities to have that we could learn from. But instead we've created this division.
Yeah. It's unfortunate because there's no like, um, what's the word I want to use? Like kind of like this internship of like mentor and someone who is, not to say below, but someone who could advance in their career and learn from
Mm,
him. And George has been successful for so many years, and he's represented our community publicly for so well. And when I heard that, yeah, at first I was like a gut reaction, like, oh wow, this sucks. Hearing someone who I looked up to, uh, I wanted to be a comedian. If I wasn't a therapist, I would have been a comedian. So I looked up to him and I thought the world of him. But then I had to kind of get it out of it. Like, this has nothing to do with Ralph Barbosa. Like, this is deeper than Ralph,
yeah.
right? To go blatantly to say something about like, who the fuck is this guy? Like, why are you saying his name? Like, uh, I can imagine many times George felt like an outsider just trying to break the barrier. I mean, how many shows do we know growing up that had Latino representation? The only one I can think of is I Love Lucy. And as a Cuban American, so they didn't have many shows that showed what couples look like, what families look like. So I'm sure he had to fight really hard, and he got a little bit of support here and there. But I think, and I could be wrong, but I think I'm right that George probably is projecting what he probably went through, and that he had to fight really hard. And those qualities of fighting really hard is really great. And it's important to kind of like help other people so they can learn. Because that's the thing that what I like about, you know, other populations, like groups such as Caucasians, like they pass on generational wealth. They're able to network. That's why the cycle where they're continuing to be successful and they advance, because there's this connection, there's this community. Like when you go to high school, there's these people that are like the guest speakers, and they speak to them directly and they teach them the skills of how to advance. But unfortunately within our group, like it's like we often have to, and even George Lopez makes jokes about this, which is really hilarious. He makes jokes about that, that sometimes we're our own worst enemy.
Yeah.
You know, when I think one of his jokes, he said, like, when you're applying for a job, it's like, mentiroso, you're not getting a job. Why are you lying, right? Something like that. And he's often like, you can't give people their flowers because you have to have there's a little bit of hate in those. And I think George uses his pain and makes amazing humor with it in his profession, but I can see that there's pain in his personal life with those experiences.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
also, I don't. I mean, and some of it is I don't even know if it's a generational thing because I mean, I think about it for myself, like as a someone who, I mean, I used to. I mean, I'm still a musician, but I mean, I used to study music, be around musicians all the time. I can't tell you how many fucking times I've seen really good musicians and been like, this fucking guy's whatever. Like I could do that, like that type of fucking attitude. Um, and now I look back and it's embarrassing, because I've dealt with the shit that I had to deal with within myself. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like my own personal judgment, which stemmed
Ah,
from other places. You know?
yeah, yeah. You bring up a really good point because sometimes it's not even what other people are saying; it's how we treat ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's what Don
Yeah.
Miguel often talks about, the poison, the way we talk about ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, but you know what, dude? Like, also good for you for catching that. Even myself, I know I was like, I don't want to help people. Like, I've been in that mode too. Where I think like, damn, I've I've tried to slow other people down in order to fucking put myself in a better place. And I also love the fact that you gave flowers on the generational wealth. Because even that, dude, I think when you look at the full spectrum of uh really everything, like looking at the full plate, like I said, even for us as men, like, okay, cool, yeah, like this masculinity is very toxic, but like masculinity can be celebrated as well, right? And like we have to
Yeah.
look at the full spectrum, and that's the reason why it's called the modern macho, is because we're not trying to get rid of men. It's like we just want to polish it up and change it up a little bit. um
Yeah, there's this word that I love using too. Have you guys heard of the term a caballero, right?
yes, sir.
And one of those qualities I love is that you take leadership, you take responsibility, and that's how I kind of I try reframing like this modern way of being is like we take initiative, we own things, we take responsibility, and to me that's what's being a man.
Hmm.
Yeah,
The
I love that.
integrity piece. I
Yeah.
mean, because I feel like I've always heard like that term integrity, and to me, it's been synonymous with masculinity. But I mean, it hasn't always. I can't say it's been illustrated like the way that ideally I would want it
Mhm.
to be illustrated. Um, yeah, most def. I mean, and not. I don't want to take too sharp of a turn. And Carlos, I don't know if there was other things you want to talk about. I know on the form that you filled out, Carlos shared with me that there was something you wanted to talk about. I didn't know if that's where you were going into, Carlos.
Yeah, well, no, so real quick before I went in there, I was gonna talk real quick
No.
about I was trying to find the person that said it, but
Mm,
I think it was Jonathan Majors. There's a podcast on NPR that just came out, but there's a quote that he said where he says that they asked him what he thinks masculinity is, and it's basically along the lines of it is unmasculine to demasculate another man.
Mm.
mm,
And I felt like when I like that struck a nerve because I was like, damn, I've been that motherfucker. Like
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
I've been that dude that tried to be a man by belittling another dude, and I'm like, nah, man, like we got to take care of each other.
Did it go deeper as to like why
It
or
it it
what are
it
your
did.
thoughts?
It went in depth. Like I'd have to actually like find it, and kind of he shares a little more of his own personal experience and stuff like that. But I just remember that because I wrote that out specifically in one of my notes, and I was like, dude, the way he worded that is like, whoa, it hit me because I know that I've been on that end of like me being a man was like, how many dudes can I fucking step on, essentially,
And I
and
mean,
that's something I'm proud of.
I think one of the things, and yeah, Cesar, I want to hear your thoughts too. But one of the first thing that popped into my head was like, yeah, I've been that asshole, and I know every time I've been that asshole, it's because I was insecure.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, good
You
point.
know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's right. So now, well, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was tying all this, like, the coping mechanisms, bridging the gap, and stuff like that. Um, you focus specifically on EMDR, and I know you have a psychedelic approach. Um, I just want to start from the beginning. What the heck does that even mean? Put this all together for me. I was telling Sant, I saw that you posted something yesterday about, I think, being able microdosing or something becoming legal for therapy. I think in Mexico or something like that. Which I'm thinking like, oh, if my mom found out, if she knew therapy already as it is like for crazy people, if she found out that there was, quote unquote drugs involved. So I kind of want to give you like the space to like, hey, educate us, dude, share some stuff with us. What is EMDR, and what is this psychedelic approach?
Yeah, so I'll start off with EMDR. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And basically, what it means is that whenever there's something that happens traumatic to us,
Mm.
it's stored on our body. And when it's stored on our body, it comes up with a negative thought about ourselves, a feeling, a body sensation, and all this stuff is activated in the body. And the way EMDR works is that through eye movements of your eyes that goes left to right, you're able to process traumatic events that have happened to you. So it's very different than traditional therapy where you're like, oh, I'm going to sit down for an hour and just talk to a person. In fact, this is the complete opposite. Uh, your brain is doing all the healing in therapy,
Mm.
and you're just kind of like allowing your brain to do all the work. So the way it looks like is think of your brain as like a game of Jenga. And in Jenga, all your pieces from top down are your life experiences. Now, in EMDR, it focuses on the first time something traumatic happened to you and the very worst time that something's happened to you.
Mm.
And what's up happening is that when a traumatic event happens in the present moment, we get activated and we get triggered, and our response gets activated. And whether we shut down or we blow up, whatever spectrum that we're in, it gets activated. And what happens is through eye movements in therapy, you're able to process the information and see it in a different manner than we first saw it. So what ends up happening is all those Jenga pieces that have happened since those traumatic events, they get removed, and you upload your software by putting in new information with new thoughts, new images, new memories, new physical sensations to that same memory that happened. So all those
Interesting.
things that happen, it gets connected, and all these Jenga pieces that fell down now get rebuilt up. And there's new ways. So anytime a new trigger happens to that same experience, we're no longer responding to those triggers the same way because we change the way we see it. The image looks different, the thought, the feeling, the body sensation has all evolved.
Wow.
So you're rebuilding those same experiences, essentially, is what you're doing. Holy
Hmm.
shit.
You know what? I didn't know that's what this was. I went to therapy one time and the lady explained it to me, but she didn't explain it to me like this. She just kind of told me the history of it, where it came from, and I honestly thought it was fucking weird. Like I didn't know there was science behind it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's a fun fact. One of the reasons how it gets started was the EMDR therapist that started it. Her name is Frances. And as she was like creating this type of therapy and it was evidence based, there was a huge earthquake that happened in Mexico, and a lot of people were struggling with the earthquake because of the trauma, and people were encapsulated from everything that happened. And there was only one or two therapists that were there to help out hundreds of people, and they didn't know how to help out all these people. So what they taught them is what's called butterfly tapping, and it's the same thing with eye movements, but essentially you're moving your body from one part of your body to another. And this is called the butterfly tapping. And it's the same thing with your eyes. So you're able to process things by just tapping very slowly. So what ended up happening is that those therapists that were there in Mexico, they had all these people that were there and having them tap their traumas as they're talking about it. And they were able to regulate their nervous system and see that memory differently. And it's so fascinating how EMDR has helped out so many people. And it's very different than traditional cognitive therapy where you just talk about it. This really focuses on the trauma, and it shifts the way you think, your body sensations, the images, everything.
Wow.
Mhm. Damn, dude,
That's
thank you
awesome.
for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna just be looking left to right, just all day. No, I'm
That's
just kidding.
that's
But I'm sure it's a guided thing, right? It's not just as simple as doing the motion.
Yeah, so
Is
what
that
the
correct?
therapist does is like they focus on a specific target, like what you're wanting, your intention to work on, and then you find out all the themes of how it happens in your day-to-day life, and you
Mhm.
find out the first and the worst time that memory has happened
Got
to
it.
you,
Mm.
and then for each session, you go to those specific memories. But before you get to those memories, we create like a coping skill called a safe, calm place and resourcing. In those two spaces, you do coping skills of like how to like regulate those memories. So whenever I'm getting triggered, I go back into a memory of like going to 31 flavors and having my favorite ice cream, and like just noticing like that rich flavor of chocolate chip and that cake cone, and it just brings me this nostalgic relaxation because I went from being activated and triggered. Now I'm shifting my mind to like thinking of something calming,
Mm.
and that just brings me back to like this relaxation, this safe place of like I feel good right now. I just expanded my trauma and I talked about it, but now I need a container to kind of regulate myself. So it's like all these steps that it's broken down into 8 stages.
And what's cool,
Mm.
what's cool about what you're sharing too is like you're still tackling it, right? Like you're not putting a blanket over it or you're trying to cover it up with something that's not there. It's like you're literally going back to that incident. It sounds like, but
Mhm.
you're paying attention to other things that you definitely, the trauma took over and went. Damn, that's kind of crazy, bro. I couldn't help but
Yeah.
Mhm.
I couldn't help but think about when like my experience growing up when I saw the pit bull rip the kid's cheek off, and Son was Son has a pit bull, and Son was always like, no, dude, like statistically speaking, I don't give a fuck if this kid passes away, bro. Like, don't put me near a fucking pit bull. But like, I like literally as you were saying that, I put myself in that position. I was like, damn, think about all the other things. Hey, dude, that's crazy, man. I appreciate you sharing that, dude. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And what's crazy about it is like when we do these eye movements, what ends up happening is kind of think of it like you're in a train and you're on the passenger side and you're seeing all these images of these past experiences. Like, for example, the Pitbull situation. And like that's if that's your moment of like your fear of pit bulls, you go to that memory, and as you are having your eye movements, you're having new thoughts, new memories, whether it's related to the pit bull or it's connected in some way. It's all connected in some way. You're realizing where it's coming from. Maybe it has nothing to do with the pit bull, but
Mm,
something happened that got activated in that moment that makes you respond that way now. So what ends up happening is like all these images and memories and smells, the taste of that moment, like you're seeing it through like a window and it's all happening so quickly, kind of like the movie
Mm.
Bill and Ted, where you're going through all these timelines of all these things that happened to you and you're like, whoa, how did I even get here? And now I'm like thinking of something completely different, but it's all connected, and it just kind of like makes you think like, oh my gosh, how did I even get there? And then
sure,
you're able to reprogram your brain like, ah, okay, now I know where it's coming from.
sure,
Mm.
sure. Yeah, and I'm sure it takes practice, and I'm sure there's obviously it's not a end all be all fix in one session. But it definitely I think puts a perspective on what it really is about, and I appreciate you sharing that. Um, the psychedelics, bro.
Yeah, the big word.
But it scares the shit out of me just talking about it. To be honest with you, so I'm actually really like excited for you to share some stuff with us.
Yeah, so I'm getting trained in this program right now. It's a 10-month program. It's psychedelic assisted therapy. And right now, the only thing that is approved by the FDA is doing ketamine assisted therapy.
Mhm.
And the two that are soon going to be approved by the FDA, if I was a gambling man in Vegas, I would put my money on uh, mushrooms, also known as psilocybin, and MDMA, also known as ecstasy. These two approaches in therapy are going to be amazing and how it can be helped out therapeutically. I want you to think about it this way. Imagine you're in taking this medicine, for example, MDMA, and for your whole life, you just kind of felt stuck and like, I can't talk about these things. In fact, I have to numb myself. It's not good talking about this stuff. So, what ends up happening is that whenever we talk about something traumatic, we have a window of tolerance of how much time we can talk about it. Because if it's too much, we shut down, we become irritable, we get overwhelmed, or maybe we drink, or whatever we do. We have this small window of tolerance where we can actually talk about these things. Now, what MDMA does is that it opens that window of tolerance so you can go a little bit deeper into these traumatic things that happen. And what ends up happening is by taking this medicine, it allows you to be compassionate, curious, and you're connecting to other people, to the experience. And you're having a shift of paradigm. Like the way you're thinking about it is so differently. And even with psilocybin mushrooms, it allows you to just be so open to like that experience and see it in a completely different manner. And having a therapist there to facilitate your intention, your preparation of like, what do I want to get out of this medicine? How can it help me? And focusing on that. And then having that dosing session where you're actually going through that. And the therapist is there to kind of help you to heal. And what a lot of the therapist does during those dosing sessions is that they help you with your own inner healing. The therapist kind of sits back, allows you to have your own inner healing, because this type of
Mhm.
approach really believes that every human person has a capability of healing themselves. So my job as a therapist is providing a safe space where people can heal and have inner healing, where they can focus on helping themselves out. And then after that step is what's called the integration. So after you learn what you learned during that dosing session, you integrate it to your life with family, whether it's with friends or colleagues, whether you're setting a boundary or whether you're more open to another experience. This medicine, whether it's psilocybin, ketamine, uh, or MDMA, really allows you to see things completely different.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's so it sounds like it being in a controlled environment, obviously with a certain dose, right?
Yeah.
And I dig what you said about the therapist isn't gonna like solve the problems, right? Because it's I think and I agree, right? Essentially, the goal is that everyone it like puts the pieces together themselves, right? Like it does you, I'm sure, as a professional, even me, I would say as a friend, and I think Santi can agree. Like it does us no good to be like, oh, Isan, I know what your problem is. It's this. You need to do this, this, and this, right? And I think a lot of it, I think of it as a dad, and I think that I kind of try to take the same approach with my son, where I'm like, I want to allow him to process things. It does me no
Yeah.
good to be like, no, you don't do this, you do this, don't do that, don't, because it's like, oh, he gets it, he knows what he can and can't do, but does he really understand what the fuck he's doing, right? Because I know
Yeah.
I just like I know I had to get up and wash dishes, I know I had to get up and fucking clean my room, but it's like, ask me, it's because of myself, because that's how I showed myself love, and because it's how I like showed myself that I was gonna take care of myself. No, I didn't understand any of that. So when I moved out and I didn't have my mom on my ass, it was like, none of this matters, dude. Like I don't need to clean ever again, you know?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
you bring up a good point. Kind of like in my field as a therapist, Carlos, like I try working myself out of a job. I tell them from the very first time I meet them, I want to work myself out of a job working with you. Like I'm here to
mm,
help you temporarily. I don't know how long it's going to be, but I'm here to kind of hold that space. But the reason why I do that is because two things. One, I don't think I know everything about each person. It's not like a one size fits all. Sometimes I have like an idea of like, I think this theme is coming up. But the reason why I don't say it right away is because like, kind of like what you said, Carlos, like it's so much easier just to say like, oh, this is what's happening, just stop it. But people don't change that way. People don't grow, people don't process. What ends up happening is if I just tell them all these things, they're going to be codependent on me. And
mhm.
maybe I'm this person that they're going to be codependent on. And then when they're outside of therapy, they're going to find another person to be codependent on. I want them to have this innate ability of like looking back at themselves and having their own inner healing of them figuring it out. My job as a therapist is kind of shedding light on things I'm noticing, and then they're coming up with their own answers.
Yeah,
Mm.
I love that, bro. That's dope, man.
Mhm.
Have a quick question. Like, I'm curious about what your thoughts. So, because I mean, obviously, these are the substances you brought up, right? Those are kind of taboo things, right? To kind of bring up in any just space, right? Like, let's say like to your employer. I mean, not that you would ever tell them that you going to therapy. You don't need to be telling them that shit. But you see what I'm saying, right? Like just taboo stuff, or to be tell your loved one, maybe a family member, whatever. So I'm curious, like, like there are other substances that people also hold on to that people claim help them. Sometimes it's marijuana, sometimes it's alcohol, which we talked about. And so like what is the difference, I guess, in this sense, right? Like what exactly is it about like these certain substances that allow people to dive deeper, that I guess other substances that are also popularized in the mental health community, mainly marijuana, but I'm also gonna pair in alcohol in there because I think people do utilize it maybe like subconsciously for mental health purposes, whether it's
Yeah, you
healthy
bring
or
up a
not
good point.
healthy, but I'm curious.
Question.
Yeah, so like in regards to like alcohol, for example, like what ends up happening is when people drink alcohol, it's what's called in therapy maladaptive coping skills. Like we're not using a healthy coping skill, we're finding something to kind of numb what we're going through. And the difference between alcohol versus these psychedelics is that it focuses specifically on these things and allows you to have openness, curiosity, and understanding. And I think there's also research too. I haven't done as much research on cannabis assisted therapy, but there is a thing that's going on, and I think in some states that they're already doing that. I think like in Oregon, it's a pretty progressive state, and Colorado is a progressive state
Mm.
where people are able to use these medicines in a therapeutic setting. But definitely, like ketamine right now, it's a dissociative, um, and that's approved by the FDA right now. But the other, like MDMA and psilocybin, they're on their last stages of like research, and they're submitting all their information to the FDA. But the difference is between like alcohol, where it kind of numbs you, you're actually focusing on the healing of like the aspect. So imagine you have, because with these medicines, it lasts for 6 to 8 hours. For that period of time,
Mm,
you're focusing
Oh,
on what you wanted to work on, and you're like realizing, and you're like, I'm going to do this therapeutically, not recreationally, but just like, how can I heal all this pain? And what I like about this medicine, especially with men, and you brought up a good point, Santi, about like, man, what are my friends or what are my coworkers or my employers, they're going to say? To be honest with you, like this medicine has been there for many years. And in Oaxaca, there's this lady by the name of Maria Urbina that helped out her whole community using mushrooms in a
mm,
healing ritual way. So it's actually in our culture, and it's been in other cultures too, that people have used these medicines, but it's only when it happened on the war on drugs in the 80s, when the administration during that period of time was saying, hey, we don't know how to get enough people of color into jail. We can't enslave them, but you know what we will do? We'll have the war on drugs, and we will, you know, get them into these jails. And that's what they did, and that's why there's an influx of like certain populations of color in these systems that just oppress them, and they never are able to get out of it because it's a system that is broken, that doesn't help them to advance. So what this medicine does, that's been here for many years, it allows you to like be open to these traumatic events and not shut down so easily. You have a therapist there helping you to have that inner healing, so you just don't shut down. And it's amazing what it's doing. And if you
yeah,
guys get a chance,
awesome.
there's a Netflix documentary about what I'm talking about. It's called How to Change Your Mind by Michael Polland.
we have
Sounds
homework, son.
no.
How to Change Your Mind by Michael Polland, and it's a Netflix doc. It's a 4 episode series.
I think not that I've seen it. I think like
It's
seen
on there.
it. Like yeah, just like
Our
the.
listeners, write that shit down too. How to Change Your Mind by Michael
We're
Pollan.
Yeah, and they also have a book on it too.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
really good stuff going on.
fuck yeah.
Well, my guy, thank you so much, man. I want to be mindful of your time. I really appreciate you joining us. Sharing your wisdom, sharing your story too. Letting us into your mindset, your perspective, your approach into things. I think as a community, as a man, bro, I feel very. I guess I go to bed tonight with like a sense of peace, knowing that we have men like yourself helping other men out there, knowing that your heart's in a good place, that you really give a fuck. one of my biggest things with therapy I've realized is like it's just so important to feel safe, and like just in hearing you share, show up basically with everything, being vulnerable with us, like that to me is like, dude, that's the safety sometimes that we need to know. Because up until this point, I think Santi brought up a good point. Like, I've never really had conversations with therapists that are men. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm doing better. I can go to therapy. We'll talk to another guy. I don't know, bro.
Yeah.
Like, easy. You know what I mean? So it really means a lot, man. And I think for our listeners too, something that sticks out is just like the different approaches, right? Because as you mentioned, I couldn't help but think when you mentioned about like sometimes it's not about sitting and talking about your childhood memories for an hour. And I think that there's kind of like this notion of like that's what therapy is you're gonna go and you're gonna talk about, you're just gonna talk for an hour, right? And while there's nothing wrong with that, because I think sometimes I've needed that, but like there's different approaches to therapy as well. It's like clothing, like there's different styles, there's different, you got to shop around and find what's best for
Oh, definitely. And I'll tell you this, like there's so many therapists out there. I'm like, oh my gosh. They're horrible out there. And it's so important to interview your therapist before you get somebody because I've had a horrible therapist myself. I'm like, man, I don't even know how they're therapists, but like you
right.
said, like you gotta like try someone out and see if they're a good fit for you.
I love that. I love that. Son, do you have any last minute thoughts?
No, I don't. But I did want to give Cesar, if you want to share socials, like
Can we find you?
anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on TikTok, on Instagram, CESAR Councils. I'm on both those platforms, and I have a private practice in Whittier. And I know most people seek out women as therapists, and that makes so much sense. But imagine like having a corrective experience of like being with a man, right? How healing that could be of like, I can be safe in these moments. But yeah, whether male, female, whatever color, it's more importantly, it's the relationship. Like you got to know, like I
Love
can
that.
vibe. This person's not just a therapist. This person's a real person, and I can get deep with them. And I think that's what I try to bring into my therapy, like this authenticity of like being yourself. Like I use profanity, whatever they're saying, I'm going to match it. Like I want them to be like, no, this is my space for an hour.
Yeah.
Sure, sure. I love that, dude. I love
Oh
that.
yeah.
I want to encourage our listeners to like, to subscribe, get in the YouTubes here. As you guys know, bi-weekly. Shout out to Candido, to Leo, to Matas, to the guys that joined us tonight that got involved in the chat. We love y'all. We appreciate y'all. To all the guys in the book club. Make sure to follow the Instagram. If you guys have any comments, questions, concerns, as you guys all know, join us in the DMs. Cesar, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much again
That's
for
what
joining
I
us.
said. Thank you guys for doing this, by the way,
Of
and having me
course.
on.
Of
Appreciate it.
course. Unless you guys have anything else, I'm good.
All right, man. Good night, everyone.
You guys have a good night.